Hey YouTube, I have a build review to cover with you. This is the Phoenix model Spitfire. This is a 55-inch ARF I picked up at Tower Hobbies. And I just uploaded the unbox just a little while ago, and I worked pretty hard over the last day getting this thing put together. And this is the almost final product. It's just about ready. I have a few more things left to do. I'll start off with the nose. That's the yellow spinner backplate that came with the kit, and I'm only using that for spacing and testing purposes to test clearance for the cowl, and that's the 3-bladed prop I'll be using. So I'm still waiting for my 3-blade spinner, and once that gets here, I'll finish balancing the airplane and we'll get it ready for the maiden. So for now, let's just go through a couple of different things that I thought it'd be good to point out. Lessons learned during the build, so if you're considering something similar, you'll have some ideas before you get started on what you need to do. So first things first, I went with the Cobra motor. This is the 610 kV Cobra, and I don't know, it's going to probably be really hard to see this with the lighting that I have in here, but that prop shaft is very small, and I'll include a static picture I took comparing the prop shaft off of an Airwing RC 55-inch Mustang, a 1400 millimeter Mustang. That one is long enough for the prop, you know, 4-bladed prop and a nose cone and everything else. This thing, I ended up having to shim the motor to get this to work because the shaft is just really short. So first things first with the Cobra, if you're going to use that motor, be prepared to do a little extra work getting things to fit, and everything is about as close as I can make it without resorting to longer motor mount screws or cutting the cowl and sliding it back more. The next thing on that note is that regardless of what the directions said, my cowl is all the way back up against the leading edge. Maybe that's exactly where it's supposed to go, but this cowl had to go all the way back in order for me to get the clearance, and I just have enough. This back plate is out around, so you'll see it wobble, but you see when I spin it, even with the wobble, I've got enough clearance, but just. Okay, so what I did to shim it was I added a couple of washers underneath the motor's X mount on the firewall. There are other ways to do it. You can move the firewall itself forward. I thought about doing that. It would have been more work, but that would also been doable. Next thing I want to point out is the little air scoop down here. In the unbox video, I said, oh yay, they put a hole in there and they got ventilation, but it's not in the right spot. The ESC is right under here. So this cowl has to be cut. I'm not gonna run the plane like this because I know better. I know I'm in Florida and I know with that heat, even though I have 100 amp ESC, just not a good idea to run unventilated. So I will be cutting a hole in the cowl right about there. And I'll also be cutting egress holes in the back and the film covering in the tail. Okay, let's see. Next thing, the cowl screws. You got to be real careful. There's wood block supports inside. The bottom screws are fine. The top screws, really close. You have to, first off, after you drill it out and set the screws, definitely put some CA on the holes. On the top screws, I think I want to get longer screws. I just don't trust them. I know they're biting the wood. They made holes in the wood. They thread into the wood and all that, but I just don't think they're in far enough. And it would have been a simple fix for Phoenix to just include a slightly longer screw. There's plenty of space inside, and even if there weren't, you could trim it. Okay, next thing I want to talk about is the battery compartment. I mentioned in the unbox video that I would put a couple of well-known battery sizes in here to give folks an idea of how much space is in that battery compartment. So first up, I've got a 4-cell, this is a 4-cell, Admiral 4-cell 5000. So I'm just gonna lay that guy in there and let you see. Now this is, I'll push it as far forward as I can. Sorry about the camera angle, I'm trying to pay attention to what I'm doing. Okay, that's about as far forward as I can push it. And you can, I don't know if you can see inside there, there's plenty of room side to side. I've got a extension. This is a extension off my ESC that my Castle Creations 10 amp BEC is connected to, but there's plenty of room inside, side to side for this one. So definitely room for a bigger battery, no problem. I thought I would get out Turnigy or Multistar 10,000 that I use for FPV birds and see if I could cram that in there, because I know a lot of guys were adding extra weight with the 5,000. So the problem is it's really close, and maybe with a little Dremel action underneath, it's probably too hard to see, but there's a little balsa stringer up there that's blocking the battery from sliding into that compartment. So that one's just a little too big. That won't fit. And the back that I plan on running with it, because it's what I have, is a 4200 Zippy 5-cell, Zippy Compact 5-cell. And as you can see, there's plenty of room in there for that guy. I mean, there's more than enough room for a 4200 5-cell. So those are the batteries. I've got another one sitting over there, but it's a little smaller than the 4200, so there's no real point in showing that one. Okay, now on to the rest of the build. Let's see, a couple of the problem areas were, I used the Tower Hobbies recommended high-tech 75 BB, it's a ball bearing servo, for the retracts, and it did not fit in the servo plate, so that required some modification. You just had to basically cut it out and make it a little bigger. It wasn't particularly hard to do, but it had to be done. The next thing is on the servo retracts. They are fiddly, I'll admit that. It takes it takes some patience to put that together. I'll do a demo of the retracts in just a minute to show you what they look like, but they work, and that's the bottom line. I got them to work out okay. The next thing I noticed, and I think I noticed it a little too late to do anything about it unless I want to start cutting things apart, and really I don't. But when I was trimming up the airplane and setting the throws and taking my measurements to make sure everything measured right, I looked at the rudder, and right there you can see the rudder is off center from the vertical stabilizer just a little bit, a millimeter or two, and that is centered though. From the rear of the plane, that rudder is perfectly centered. So I attribute that to the slot hinge being off just a little bit. It wasn't too terrible, but it was definitely off a little bit. I wanted to cover something else about the retracts. In the book, they show that the retracts, and this is another point about the high-tech servo, they show that the retracts have to be 12 millimeters from the pivot screw on the servo. So 12 millimeters for one and 12 millimeters for the other. So you need a total of 24 millimeters total spacing, and they're not kidding about that. The high-tech wheel that came, the disc that came with that servo, it was not 24 millimeters. It was something like 20 or 19. And I thought, oh, that's close enough. It'll be fine. It wasn't fine. The problem that you have with that is that the servo won't lock, or the landing gear won't lock. So you can either lock down or lock up, but it won't lock both. It actually technically did lock, but it was just so close that I didn't feel comfortable. I thought for sure that was a surefire way of having a landing gear incident. So what I wound up doing, and I'm not a big fan of it, but what I wound up doing was using one of the double-sided arms. That one did have from end to end 24 millimeters, so that wasn't too much of a problem with that arm on there. And took a little more bending of the wires, but I got it right. Another point that I'll make on the landing gear wire and the push rod wire in general, it's kind of a malleable metal. It doesn't bother me so much for the tail control surfaces. It doesn't really bother me too much for the ailerons either, because it's so short. And the flaps, they only really take tension in one direction, so it doesn't bother me on the flaps either. But on the landing gear, I really wasn't too happy about that, because you're pushing and pulling, and there was no push rod or guide tube support for those. So I threw out the control, the wires, what am I thinking of? The metal control arms for the retracts, and replaced it with piano wire that I happen to have in my supply kit. So just a thought. I mean, I don't think it's, I don't know that it's necessarily going to be a problem, but I did it on mine just in case. Okay, next thing I want to do is put a battery in and then flip it over and show you the operation of the gear. And then I want to show you some things on the underside of the airplane as well. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and operate the landing gear. And I'll talk about where the gear locks in place in just a minute, but let me just show you, this is the retracts with the mechanicals. So they work fine. I mean, they're pretty quiet. You got to spend some time working on the control wire, but other than that, once you get it kind of dialed in and you make sure they lock in both directions, they work good. And I think they'll be pretty sturdy. I was a little disappointed. I thought they were full metal retracts when I did the unbox, but then when I got into it, I noticed that the trunnions were definitely plastic. So we'll see how long they hold up. And I know there are replacement alternatives out there if it comes to that. But the bottom line is they're in, they fit, they work, and we'll see how long they last. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over, and I want to show you some things on the underside. Okay, so for being such a nice kit, this is one of the biggest disappointments I think in the whole thing, and that's that. The gear do not close flush with the bottom of the wing. In fact, if you look at the strut, you can see the strut itself. You go about wing, the base of the wing, the strut sticks out on the bottom almost the full way, and that is locked. I mean, that's in the locked position. Oops, sorry. That is in the locked position, so they don't move down any further, and they are mounted correctly. I saw some discussion in the forums about this, and some people attributed it to the fact that they may have mounted it higher. It looks like they may have reinforced this because this mount is above the wing. And I saw some pictures of some guys kind of hogging that out with a Dremel to try and get them sit lower. But I just don't, I think it was an engineering miss, to be honest with you. The next thing I want to point out are the wheel wells. And get the gear up here real quick, or down. There we go. So there are the wheel wells, and you have to trim these with scissors. There was also some discussion in the groups about the paint chipping. I didn't have any problems with the paint chipping, so you really do need to use Lexan scissors. I can't even imagine trying this with regular house scissors. You'd have a real hard time getting an edge, and that may cause paint chipping. I didn't have any real issues with paint chipping. Just took my time, cut them, rough cut them first, and then I cut them down, close to the lip size that I wanted. And then after that, I just took a little sandpaper and just kind of smoothed out the rough edges. And I did that on both sides, and they came out fine. I mean, it's a model. I know, scale guys or, the real detail model guys may not like that at all, but they're fine. They do the job. I'm not too worried about it. Let's see, the plates, the wing mounting bolts, they're nylon, and the first time you screw those in, they feel kind of tough. And what I learned to do is just kind of walk them down. So the first time I put the wing on, I put the fuselage in my lap, and then set the wing pins up here into the firewall, or the balsa plate that's there, and then you lay the wings in and put the bolts in with this plate in place, and then just kind of walk them down. Do a couple turns this one, couple turns this one. That seemed to make it a lot easier at first when I put it on. I expect it'll loosen up a little bit over time, but I honestly I don't take my wings off that much, so it probably won't matter a whole lot. Next thing I want to point out on the flaps. So there are the flaps. I've got takeoff flaps and I've got landing flaps. Now, if I'm going to give you a side angle on this, that does not look like much, but that's what the book calls for. That's 20 millimeters on the flaps. So I'm going to try it out and see what I think. I can always add more later. And honestly, I don't really like landing with flaps on models anyway, unless I have a real reason to slow down. But I'll try it out. It's kind of cool that they're there. And on this plane being as heavy as it is, it might really help kind of slow things down and get it on the ground a little easier. But that is the book spec. That's exactly 20 millimeters from open. Let me grab the radio here real quick and I'll close them just so you can see those operate. So there's takeoff flaps, which is about halfway, not very much help at all. And there's landing flaps. There is discussion in the groups about putting that control horn on before you glue in the hinges for the flaps, and I would absolutely recommend doing that. These control horns are a little tedious anyway to get the screws straight in. So if you can imagine trying to stick your hand in there and hold the bottom plate underneath while you're screwing that in, just not a lot of fun. So I would definitely recommend putting that putting that hinge in, or the control horn in, before you glue those flaps, the flap hinges in. Okay, the tail wheel. I really don't like this tail wheel. I mean, I've done a lot of models. They all mount kind of the same way, and I forgot to Dremel those off. I have to get that done. But this tail wheel, this particular tail wheel, just feels really flimsy. It's out of round. I just don't like it. It's okay, but I think I've got another tail wheel out. I'll see if I can get it to fit. But the one that I have, I think, is a little thicker. So I might have to look around and see if I can find a better option than that. I do like the double control rods for the elevator rather than the torque rod. I am not a big fan of the torque rods. I know they work. I know there's a lot of planes out there with them. I'm not a fan. This one's really nice because inside under the wing where you connect the servos, there's a 3-piece connector. One rod goes to the servo, and then one rod goes to this one, this side of the elevator, another goes to that one. Once you get it centered up and locked down tight, you don't have to worry about it. I've had a couple of airplanes like this, and I like this system quite a bit better than I like the torque rods. So let's see, regarding decals, I still have a couple little bumps, but I used water and soap to put these on. It looks like I've still got a couple little bumps. I did my best, but that's what I'm left with. Who knows what'll happen in the heat anyway. It might shrink up a little. I think that's it for the undercarriage. That's all I really wanted to show you. So let me flip it back over and we'll wrap this up. Okay, I remembered one other thing I wanted to mention about that Cobra motor. That Cobra motor gave me fits to get it on there. I mean, I hope it puts out the power they say it does. I haven't put it on the watt meter yet. I will. But another problem, and I'll put a static picture in the video so you can see exactly what I'm talking about, but the firewall motor mount holes did not line up with the Cobra cross mount, the motor mount. So and I've had to deal with this before. In fact, it was a VQ airplane, and VQ and Phoenix are run by the same family. So they must have a standard process. I'm not sure exactly what the deal was with that bolt pattern. I've never really seen anything like that. But what I ended up doing was I filled the old holes with epoxy. I just took, I mixed up some epoxy and just kind of plugged the old holes because I didn't want any unnecessary weakness in the firewall. And then I believe I used one of the existing holes. I'm not sure. But then I just kind of put the X mount on the firewall where the thrust line would be identical. So basically I wanted the circle for the motor mount plate to be centered on the circle from the firewall. And by doing that, I maintained the thrust line of the airplane, and then I drilled new holes and then put the blind nuts on the back. And I had to do a little bit of trimming. I had to trim one washer, and I had to trim one of the blind nuts because the motor mount blind nut and the washer were touching and too close. You couldn't, one or the other wasn't going to tighten all the way down. So that was another issue I had with the Cobra. At the end of the day, I don't mind doing that kind of thing. I'm just pointing it out in case you decide to use a similar power plant. You might need to brace yourself to do a little modifications. And it's not a big deal. It's just one of those things that you're going to have to care for. And for as well as everything else went together, I was a little surprised that was off. I'm not sure why. Oh, and I forgot while I had it upside down to show you, when you glue these wheel skirts in, make sure you put some epoxy on the leading edge because there is balsa. They form balsa around the front of the cup, and you really want to press this the landing wheel well down flat. I don't like. This is a little draggy. I've got a little bit of a lip there. I don't really like that. So it would have been nice if that would have been rounded from the factory somehow, but it wasn't. So that's just another area to be aware of. And the same thing goes for the glue-on. These are glue-on exhaust pipes. I don't think they're mufflers. I just think they're straight exhausts. But you kind of glue these on, and same thing. Use Lexan scissors to cut the line. And then epoxy. I used epoxy on mine, just 6-minute epoxy. I mixed up a batch and I did one side at a time. And you want to make sure you put on the inside of the muffler right in here. You want to make sure you get a good bit of epoxy and have some alcohol ready so you can wipe down any excess epoxy that oozes out. But the main reason you want to make sure you got a good seal here is because this is the way the airflow comes. So if you don't get that front end down tight, this is going to come off. And then if you can't find it, you're going to be left with a nasty little epoxy glue mark on your cowl, which is no good. If you've built an ARF before, an ARF, you probably don't even really need the instructions. I mostly use mine for reference and a couple measurements and a couple times to see how things went together, like the wheels. And the wheel pictures are out of date, by the way. But like for instance, there's a set screw on the bottom of the gear here, and you have to loosen that in order to get the stud out. So don't get on there and start hogging that thing out, because you're going to end up stripping something or stripping a thread. Just make sure you release that set screw, and then you can back the screw out. And then of course when you put it back in, reset the set screw. Not a bad idea to use Loctite if you got it. In fact, on most of my metal to metal connections, I use Loctite. So other than that, I think it's a good model. It seems, other than the rudder being off a little bit, and I don't think that'll dramatically impact the flight characteristics at all, really. I mean, I'll just trim it to fix it. So I'm hoping it flies as good as it looks. It certainly does look good. Sure, there's some scale details missing, like there's no cannon on the wing, that kind of stuff, or the cannon feed box is not there, but I'm all right with that. I think it's going to look great in the air. Hopefully it'll fly well, and I'll try and get a flight report as soon as I get this thing out to the field. I'm still waiting for that spinner. Kind of half tempted to stick that 14x7 two-blade prop on there and go fly it with that. And I might, depending on how long that spinner takes, but we'll see. Anyway, hope the build review has been beneficial or helpful to you. If you have any questions, feel free to put them down there in the comments, and I try and answer questions the best I can. And if you like the content today, do me a favor and hit like and subscribe, because that helps other people find the content that you just watched a little easier. It'll bring my results up higher. All right, YouTube, have a good one, and I'll be back as soon as I can with a flight report.